The Northman, new film, co-written, produced, and directed by Robert Eggers, and it's a pretty amazing film. I got to say, I was not disappointed. Let me give you the pros and cons of the film. Overall, it looked fabulous. A good bit of the movie is very dark, almost looks black and white at times. Takes place at night or indoors where there's just natural lighting, torches or candles, whatever. So it's very dark. And the music is okay. Pretty good music, I think, overall. The atmosphere they created was very, very good. I thought sometimes it was watching a Monty Python film, kind of like the Holy Grail movie. It had that sort of feel to it. There were a couple of humorous moments, although it was not really meant to be funny or comedic, but they just made me chuckle a little bit. But overall, it's a pretty serious film. The old saying that all sound and fury and signifying nothing, that's kind of what this movie is. In the end, it is a tale, a Norse tale. And believe me, I loved Greek mythology as a kid, read a lot of it, and I read a lot of Norse mythology, Odin, Thor, Loki, and all of them. I really loved that kind of fiction mythology. This film takes from that the story of Amleth, and he's a son of a king, and the king was deposed and murdered early in the film. So now he wants revenge against his uncle who slayed his father. And it gets very, very deep in the plot. It's a little confusing at times. They speak in a sort of a Shakespearean style, if you will, not as good as Shakespeare, of course, but that sort of style of speaking that is okay. It kind of fits the overall film and where it takes place in 1895. There's a lot of deceit, treachery, and ultimately revenge. It's all about revenge all through the movie. And it's very, very gory, very, very violent at times. In the beginning, the first half of the movie, I was a little bit bothered by too much busyness. Looked like there was so much choreography that it looked a little bit fake, to be honest. I wasn't buying it. This really looked as real as it probably was intended to look. Even with all the set and production design looked wonderful, there was just too many people moving around too fast. It made me think times in 895, I'm sorry. I don't think people were that active, but they say some of the criticism of the film. I just looked briefly at one of the write-ups on it, and it said basically people were complaining it was too slow. I didn't find the film too slow at all myself. It had plenty of action, plenty of movement. There's basically a little bit of skin, a couple of lovemaking scenes, but they're very mild. They don't even show a nipple. I mean, they don't show very much. It's nothing like the 70s movies that were much more graphic when they showed people engaging in sex. But there is a lot of killing, a lot of screaming and yelling. Okay, just be prepared for that. Men acting like animals. And overall, basically the film has a little bit of supernatural woven into it. I thought that was cool. They refer to Valhalla a lot, and the ascension into Valhalla, where the gods, the warriors go in death afterward. I think overall, Alexander Skarsgård, who played Amleth, did a fabulous job. The best actor in the film, as you might expect, was Nicole Kidman, and she doesn't really get going in the film until a little bit later, but we see a couple of juicy parts, and she's splendid. Willem Dafoe was billed as starring in the movie. He's only in it a few minutes, just very short amount of time. Bjork, I looked forward to her role. She's in the film about 2 minutes. Ethan Hawke is very good. I didn't recognize him as Amleth's father. And there were a whole lot of Icelandic people in the film, on the crew, I noticed in the credits at the end. The film was shot in Ireland. It looks spectacular, just really beautiful, gorgeous scenery, and these wide shots that remind me a little bit of Braveheart, if you remember that film. And it has a little bit of that element in the fighting. Some of the sword fighting is similar in Braveheart, but this is a much different film than Braveheart. We don't see any big battle scenes per se. There are a lot more up-close shots of people fighting. There's torches and things being burned. We see a climactic scene that takes place in a volcano. So I don't want to spoil too much more for you. I would just say that if you like action movies, drama movies, movies set in the way back 1,200 years ago when people were, men were men and women were women, but women were even very different than they are today, as were the men in the film. It's a very loud movie at times, but I thought that with the pacing of it was really pretty well done. And overall, I'm going to have to give this film a high recommendation for people that like these kinds of films. Maybe if you were a Game of Thrones fan, which I never watched that series at all, maybe one day I will, but I never watched it. But I believe if you like that series, or even like the Lord of the Rings series, but be advised, this is a much more violent film, much more graphic, very graphic at times. Most of the graphic violent scenes are very brief, by the way. They don't linger on them a long time. I was thinking as I watched the movie, I would have liked to have seen it directed by someone like Werner Herzog. I think he would have really made the film very differently, and it probably wouldn't have been paced the same way. It probably would have been more authentic and realistic looking. But again, I don't want to be too critical about the realism, because overall it does look very good. It looks like it is set in that time period. It's just that the movement and the acting sometimes was a little bit wooden, a little bit stilted, and made me mindful of the fact that I'm watching a movie. I didn't totally get lost in it and absorbed with it as I would have liked to, but I will watch the film again sometime, probably on DVD. I think it would be worthy of another viewing. I think overall, it was a very, very worthwhile movie, so I'm going to give this my recommendation. But be forewarned, it's very violent.